You're probably already looking at the Sony a6700, comparing it to a camera like the ZV-E1, the a7 IV, the a7C Mark II. That's supposed to come out. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the a6700, despite in my previous videos, has some benefits that even the Sony ZV-E1 doesn't have. And although, like I said, it wasn't the right choice for me personally, you might want to go with the a6700 after we discuss some of these points in just a little bit. And this is if you're a creator or a hybrid shooter. Either way, there are a lot of pros to sticking with APS-C for the a6700. So right off the rip, this is kind of a given. It's not necessarily a point, but if you are a hybrid shooter, it does make more sense to go with that hybrid style body design. You're getting something that's closer to a rangefinder body. I think that's why a lot of people like the original Sony a7C, just because it was closer to that range style. So if you're taking street photography photos or you're traveling, you're out in the bright sunlight, and even though the EVF is not as great as it could be, you can still put that eyepiece up and you have something to work with instead of just the screen only. But that's another benefit that you're getting is the flip out screen, that fully articulating screen like we seen on the ZV-E10, the ZV-E1, the ZV-1, and most of the other Sony cameras. I think that's just a good blend. I would have loved to have seen the A7R Mark V screen on this camera, but I don't know, maybe it'll go to the A7C Mark II, but I doubt it. Hopefully at least the A7 V. Now, I don't know how this may be a deal breaker for an actual photographer, but the one thing to note is that the EVF is brighter. It's not necessarily sharper. So you'll be able to see the stuff in the eyepiece, but it won't necessarily be clear. So I don't know how more beneficial that is to be able to use it, but again, just throwing it out there, it is brighter, but it's not sharper with higher resolution and stuff like that. The other slight improvement, which it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but if you are out and about and you're creating on the go, it does make a difference. And that's instead of the top switch like we've seen on the ZV-E10 or the ZV-E1 recently, you have a little thumb switch that goes right under the PASM dial, and that's much faster for some people. Now, I personally wouldn't miss this, especially coming from the ZV-E10 already. So I like just having those three options. But if you do want to get quickly, it's only this kind of a motion with your thumb instead of you needing to go on the top of the camera. Again, it does make a difference. It's those micro inefficiencies that add up over time when you're creating, not necessarily the other stuff so much. So like I said, it's a little bit of a difference, but when you're doing it constantly on a day-to-day basis, I think it will make a bigger difference of just not having to stretch your thumb that little bit extra. Then you have the front dial on the grip, which is deeper and better than we saw recently on the Sony ZV-E1. So it makes sense that when you're doing stuff like when I was at my nephew's graduation, I was doing a bunch of hybrid work, switching from photos to videos very quickly on the a7 IV. Well, when I put the camera up to my eye and I'm looking and I'm trying to get it, or even just looking through the screen, being able to quickly adjust the apertures to get a deeper depth of field, especially when somebody is walking. You had a bunch of kids coming, and I had tons of shots that were out of focus, and then I finally nailed the ones that I had needed, but you don't have time to keep putting the camera down, because once that procession is through, if you miss it, you miss it. So when you're doing any kind of hybrid work, even not necessarily, like I get the one SD card thing, which we're not even going to need to belabor the point, is not for professionals, but there's been a lot of professionals that have used the A6000 series and made their way up to getting a camera that costs even more, like the higher end A7R cameras that do have the dual SD cards. And not maybe everything, maybe not your main shots or on your APS-C cameras, but maybe it is still those important B shots. So the fact that it's a UHS-2 SD card is a thing. So we're past that now. But when you're working with a deeper depth of field very quickly, or you need to crank up or down the aperture just so you can get what you need, or shutter speed, it makes sense to have that quick just finger and thumb action versus doing the rotational dial on the ZV cameras, or not having it at all and you just got to touch the screen. It's much slower. Now, if you're doing videos for yourself, stuff like this, I'm not really doing that. So I get more value out of the zoom rocker on the cameras. I really enjoy that, and I'm glad it made it to the ZV-E1. But if you're doing hybrid work of any kind, that makes more sense. And I think some people just prefer it in general, but you can let me know your thoughts in the comments. And let's not get it twisted. This is the best Sony APS-C camera on the market to date, because there is no other Sony APS-C camera that can do literally all the stuff that this camera can do. And it may be a while before we see another higher end APS-C camera from Sony, because they were very specific in saying that it's not a flagship camera. So I guess there's room for growth, or for them to at least not publicly say, this is not the best that we can do, but we're not necessarily rushing to get another APS-C camera to you, if that makes sense. And I think that's kind of the case. Would we see that trio APS-C release of like the beginner, intermediate, more advanced in the APS-C lineup, like the A6100, the A6400, and then the A6600 like we saw last? I don't think so. I think it may just be an A6700, and maybe they'll do something like the A7C-R that's kind of been rumored about. There's supposed to be two A7C cameras, but we'll talk about that in another video. I think they're just trying to push you to full frame. I think they're like, here's as high as this is going to go for APS-C, and should you need anything else, you either need to go full frame ZV lineup. I don't think the ZV-E1 will be the last of these kinds of cameras. Now that I'm thinking about it a little differently, I feel like the ZV lineup is taking that trio approach. You got the ZV-1 point and shoot style, you have the ZV-E10 APS-C more budget friendly creator style, and now you have the ZV-E1 full frame, more bang for your buck as far as features that you're reaching from the A7 line, but you're still in that creator world. So I can see that trio existing there. I'm just not sure if that'll make it to the hybrid line, because it makes more sense to go A6700, A7C, let's say R or Mark II, if that becomes a thing. And then if you really need more, then you're going into the A7 line, which it's a ton of cameras like the A7R Mark IV or even the 5 that have recently come out, and then on and on. But the specs, it's easy to just go through and read all that stuff, but you're getting the best video specs possible, period, and is competing with some of the other brands when you're looking at the 4K 10-bit 422, a much better sensor. If you are used to dealing with the jello effect that comes from the ZV-E10, if you've ever had to walk around with it and it looks like the footage is even more shaky than what it is because of the jello effect. And so even though you have catalyst browse, it's still a pain to have to try to fix all that stuff. Well, now it's even less. You're getting that FX30 style video quality, nearly all the bells and whistles when it comes to video, 4K, unlimited recording, a microphone and a headphone port, a better body design, whereas, for example, my white body, white chocolate ZV-E1, it's all plastic. I don't mind that because I enjoy it being lightweight, but even that little silicone grip is only on the black versions on the ZV-E1. I mean, you can get a cage, which I have a surprise for y'all a little bit later in the video. We'll probably leave that for the end, but have a surprise for you. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the autofocus, because when I said I don't want to ever go back to a camera that doesn't have dynamic active on it, I feel like that was maybe taken a little bit out of context, in the sense that the IBIS and the digital stabilization on the A6700 is not good. That's not the case. Now, here's why I was so jazzed about not having to worry about doing the catalyst browse song and dance anymore, is because it takes up too much time in post-processing. If you're doing the shooting, the editing, the recording, like you're doing it all yourself, that's one thing. And I don't know how much time you may have available with the stuff that you're doing. I just don't want to do that. I don't even want my editor to have to do that stuff. Yes, you still have access to it on the camera like the ZV-E1, but with that dynamic active, I just don't have to. And to me, that matters more with us being able to get content out even faster. Like if you noticed, since I've had the ZV-E1, it's not just excitement around the cameras. We've been able to put out more stuff because we don't have to do as much on the back end. So it's been amazing just for the short amount of time that I've had this camera. But I don't think that A6700 users are going to miss out. I just think it's going to be different. Now, here is some of the best news that I've learned since I've done the last video, where the A6700, it only goes up to an active stabilization. However, that is not digital only. If you remember in the ZV-1 and the ZV-E10, that was a digital stabilization in standard and in active because it did not have any IBIS into the camera. It had OSS and digital in the ZV-1, and the same if you had an OSS lens in the ZV-E10. That's the camera like that didn't have any save at all in the camera. So that being the case, everything was digital. So the A6700 is even better than any of the other APS-C cameras because it's using what Sony pulled from the A7 lineup, which is this. The IBIS is active. It's not digital. So in the ZV-E1, the A7R Mark V, and the new A6700, the active stabilization is IBIS based. It's not digital based. So when you would see like it looks like the corners are ripping, like I was at a plant shop and out of town, forgot that I accidentally left active on. Even with OSS, it still looked like trash. It was disgusting. and it was horrible, but it was part of the vlog. So I'm like, just get past these, like, next 60 seconds will be good. This is not the case in this camera. So the active crops in, not because of more digital, but because it is the sensor just kind of doubling down on that stabilization. So you still are getting really good stabilization. Now, here's some of the stuff that APS-C have that not even the ZV-E1 has. One of the biggest benefits that you have going with a camera like the A6700 instead of the ZV-E1 is APS-C lenses. Now, no shocker, obviously, because it's an APS-C camera, but here's the point. Sony doesn't make lenses with OSS in them anymore like that. Most of the lenses that had OSS that are actual good vlogging lenses that are lightweight, either wide enough or wide enough with a lower aperture, are on APS-C. It's not really on full frame. Even if you look at the video I did on the full frame lenses, like, it's picking and choosing. Do you want to go third party or do you want to spend more and go with Sony? And then if you do, maybe it's an f4 instead of an f2.8, and you're not finding too many more that are like less than an f2.8 in the aperture for a really blurry background. That's small and lightweight. They're chunkers. They're super heavy lenses. For example, like the Samyang and Rokinon 14mm lens, it's nice, but it's also heavy as hell. This is one of the biggest things that I was considering when I was trying to decide between the A6700, ZV-E1. Like, the lens situation is not great if you're vlogging because you are getting into heavier lenses. And yeah, the lenses cost a little bit more, so the glass may be slightly better, but not necessarily. You're getting the better sensors, so you're getting better low light, having even lower apertures like the Sony 15mm f1.4 to compare to the Sigma 16 f1.4 difference. The Sony is lighter, a little bit sharper, but not super noticeable. The Sigma 16, heavy as hell, or heavy at least if you're comparing like your overall package when it comes to vlogging. I just don't like heavy setups. Anything past like 1.2, 3 pounds or something like that, that's too much. It's way, way too heavy for me. Now, for you, it may be a little different if you care about that kind of stuff, but I don't like carrying camera gear for traveling and stuff that's super heavy. It just becomes annoying, and then you choose to leave it back at the hotel or something instead of taking it with you for real. So you have the 10-18 f4 OSS that's now discontinued, so that lens is even cheaper. It used to run for close to $1,000, and now you may be able to get it for $300 or $400. In addition to, there are a ton, like, it feels like way more lenses that are actual better vlogging lenses. Sony 11mm f1.8. You got the Rokinon and Samyang 12mm f2, super lightweight. Like, you have so many more options that are great for vlogging and on-the-go content creation, and honestly just better options in general, plus all the full frame lenses if you went the APS-C route instead of going full frame. And yeah, you probably may be saying like, well, you can still use the full frame or APS-C lenses on the E1. Yeah, you can, but it sucks because you don't have that many megapixels to work with. So yeah, the sensor's great. Yes, it's amazing. The performance on the camera is awesome, but you're losing quality the more and more you crop in. You don't have that much more wiggle room after you have to deal with the 1.5 times crop. So let's say you go into active stabilization just to get rid of it in the ZV-E1. You still gotta use clear image zoom about 1.2-ish, the end of that to like a 1.3 for those wider angle lenses to punch in and get rid of it. You may have to go all the way into a 1.4 to a 1.5 times crop, which is as much as you can do in 4K recording. So you're pushing your camera as far as it can already go. You have no wiggle room to zoom in except in post. So you can't just zoom in real quick to see a bird or an animal or to catch something on camera. It's just not happening. So you're limiting your options. Again, some of this stuff doesn't sound like that big of a deal until you're in those situations and you're recording. You're like, dad, I wish I had got X, or I wish I had this. That's why I went with the 20mm lens that's an f2.8, because I still have a lot of wiggle room. I don't need dynamic active all the time, and I don't mostly need more than like standard and active sometimes, and clear my zoom if I want to, but I have that full 1.5 when I'm in 4K, and then the full 2.0 if you do any kind of 1080p recording at any point. So overall, I think for a lot of people, the ZV-E1 probably won't be the better choice for you, just because you're not really having that many concessions. You don't get product showcase mode, and you don't have the dynamic active state, and you're not getting the central reframing that's on the camera, but you still kind of get that cameraman feature with the AI tracking that'll follow you around. It's a nice feature to have, but if you're not going to use it, you've been living without it already to this point, will you really miss it, or is it very necessary? And that's really just like those couple things. Is it necessary or is it not? And I don't think so. So you get all the other benefits of this camera, it's a good buy. So like I said, it's not right for me personally. I do think this is going to be a dope buy for a ton of creators as their daily driver. And it doesn't matter if you're doing video or hybrid, because it's going to be a good camera. Let me know your thoughts. Like, are you going with an A7C Mark II? Is that the range you want to kind of go to, or are you looking to do something else? So if you still are here and you stuck around to the end, or maybe you fast forward, really, for those of you that fast forward, get a life. Okay, no, just kidding. I got some gifts that came in the mail from Small Rig and Falcom. We got some nice, amazing gifts that are coming in the future videos that are going to be in some giveaways. I actually have quite a bit of stuff to give away. And for those of you that won a copy of my best-selling book, The One Right Video, you still can enter in to win all of this stuff if you want to. And we have even more book giveaways and stuff going on. So, I mean, it's like the holidays. It's like Christmas time, but Christmas for creators. So stay tuned for the next videos and whatnot, and the secret codes that you'll need in order to go ahead and get access to these giveaways. But it'll be multiple people. It just won't be one person gets a bunch of stuff. It'll be each person can get whatever. So if you don't win in one video, you can still apply and get it for another video, but just turn your notifications on. Make sure you watch through the video. And with that, guys, with passion, I'll see you in the next one. But you're not going to want to miss this.